Boom. All right. We have Chris Juneau. Sam's here as well. So, Chris, you have consistently been on PT Inquest now, and your banter back and forth with Jason consistently each episode. Sam and I were chatting. Mark recommends we have more banter back and forth. So maybe we start this episode out with a little bit of banter, fun facts, if you have any. We're at episode, I think it's episode 84.
Oh, we can do something. See, you're still in these are manageable numbers. Let's find what 84 is on the old wiki.
Wait, let me make sure. This might be 85.
Oh, don't tempt me.
Hold on. Yeah, this can be 85.
85.
Yeah.
That's fine. I mean, there's got to be something, right?
One would hope.
One would hope. And this is what I do with my spare time. I mean, I just found the Pro Football Hall of Fame players that wore number 85. Oh,
all right.
Jack Youngblood, Nick, can't pronounce that name. Art Monk, Rayfield Wright. There you go. The 4 players,
Boom.
Hall of Fame, 85. Done.
Done.
I don't know any of them.
Well, that's good banter to start with. Chris, can you dive straight into your background and your current roles?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll start from the end. I work currently with U.S. military, so I'm a contractor. I'm not a government employee. I'm not employed by the military directly. I'm a contractor. I work in North Carolina. So we were just talking, Sam and I. I work in I work in Fort Bragg, which is about 45 minutes south of Raleigh-Durham. There is a Fayetteville, North Carolina that most people are not familiar with. Yeah, I know. There's another fun fact. See, there's some banner. Not Fayetteville, Arkansas, Fayetteville, North Carolina, the land of rum running and moonshiners. That's right. That's right. This is moonshine country, boys. This is NASCAR and moonshine country. So Fort Bragg is there. It is a massive Army installation with an Air Force component. It's the home of the 82nd Airborne. So the primary focus of the unit that's out there is jumpers, right? So free fall and static line jumping. And it's also the home of special operations. So the contract that I service is a U.S. Special Operations Command, it services a variety of groups on Fort Bragg that again are kind of the special operations community. And so that's where I am now. I've been here almost 2 years. And I guess I'll start from the beginning. So my background, I'm from Louisiana, played baseball at Louisiana Tech back in the heyday and my glory days, right? This is the talk around the has-beens and the once was. So that was me, baseball playing has-been and once was. Finished up Louisiana Tech, went to PT school in St. Augustine, Florida. So that was my PT degree. It was, I think at the time, it was like the second or third iteration where the doctorate program had really taken root, right? So I was right on that cusp of, it's kind of the big bad doctorate, right? You're getting this advanced education. It's going to get us paid all these buku bucks. And fast forward a decade or over a decade later, and we don't have buku bucks. But that's probably a talk for a different day. And then finished my PT degree, did a sports residency with Ohio State. And that's a whole nother story in itself. It's kind of a wild ride how I got that residency. It was, I'd love to tell you that I was the smartest person in the world, but I'm not. I'm good at meeting people, and I met some awesome people at Ohio State, ended up there for the sports residency, finished my sports residency and was kind of still interested in exploring human performance, strength and conditioning, right? The sports domain, especially in health and wellness, has expanded in so many different directions almost simultaneously, which is awesome. But you got to imagine over a decade ago, I had no idea what that meant. And most people didn't either. It was like, oh, you're a sports PT, so you do like sports injuries, not, human performance, sports performance, analytics, sports science, on-field coverage. These were evolving areas. And so I wanted more strength and conditioning. And so I, with the help of a very good friend of mine who's still in Ohio, her name is Kristen Holbrook. She did some work with the University of Louisville. She was currently working with Ohio State's athletic program. and she linked me up with who's now a very good friend of mine who works with the Pittsburgh Penguins, a strength coach. Her name is Tina Murray. Went down to University of Louisville. Essentially spent, I don't know, 6 months, 7 months being an intern. So just to catch you up, right? So I've got a bachelor in kinesiology. I've got a doctorate of physical therapy. I've got a residency training and basically an SCS at the time. And I am a strength and conditioning intern making peanut butter sandwiches at 4 o'clock in the morning, doing my duty as a strength and conditioning intern, living in the weight room for 6 months. So again, that's a whole nother world. I can tell you more about that, but 6 months there, Houston, Texas after that for about 6.5 years. And that was a multitude of things, everything from clinical mentorship, menteeship, program development, on-field coverage, teaching, the works. And then I kind of, I guess, ran myself into the ground a little bit and needed, I just needed something new to kind of sink my teeth into. And so I decided to move to New Zealand for a year and do a master's of biomechanics. It's a master's of philosophy, specifically in physics and biomechanics, in kinetics and rate of force and force development profiles. So I was there for a year. That was during COVID. The world went bonkers. I ended up having to leave New Zealand because of all of that stuff. Went to work for the U.S. Air Force in Colorado Springs, was there for 8 months, got recruited out to North Carolina. And that, sir, is your, that's tying up the ends, and meeting in the middle. So, I know that was a lot, but I guess that gives you a pretty good estimate of what the last 13 or 12 years of my career have been. So.
Yeah, I initially heard of you and saw you on some of those older clinical athlete journal clubs. Yep. We just had Quinn on recently, and I think during those calls you'd mentioned you were in New Zealand. I'm like, what's this guy doing over there? So that's kind of a bummer. It's cut short. So ideally you would have been there for 2 years. Ideally,
I would still have been there. So, I mean, my master's was a year. It was a planned year with publications and a degree on the back end. I stayed there for 11 months. I was going to be hired. So my experience in New Zealand, I was essentially serving 4 roles. I was a student, right? A master's student, collecting data, running research, lab, all that stuff. I was teaching at a physio school. So they have 2 physio universities in New Zealand, North Island, South Island. There's one in each. I was in North Island and Auckland teaching some of their entry-level biomechanics and some of their anatomy and MSK. As an adjunct faculty member, they were going to hire me to either fill a full-time assistant professorship or assistant professorship with the intention of becoming a primary faculty member, and kind of revamp some of their curriculum, specifically in a sports domain. The problem was, as COVID happened, they were very conservative as a country, and there was a hiring freeze. And so my student visa was going to expire. They couldn't hire me. There was no way to keep me there. There was a real possibility that I would have been deported. So that was essentially the thing. I was also covering rugby. I was the primary physio for one professional, but amateur, well, semi-professional, women's club. And that was a feeder for some of the Ferns, which is their primary national team. And then I was doing some assistant stuff with the men's side while I was there. And I was also seeing patients in a clinic. So I had kind of these 4 arms all happening simultaneously. And I would have stayed there, continued to see patients, continue working rugby, and taught. I just would have dropped my studentship. But, big bad COVID had other plans, man. But all things, right? It's all good. I mean, this is how it goes. So, yeah.
Did you have any prior experience with rugby before you got involved with that?
I did. And, it's probably my favorite sport, to be totally candid, for a variety of reasons. One, it's just a cool, really fun group of people. It's an underserved population, which means that they're very appreciative of you, the service, the time. And you get a chance to work with skilled individuals, but at a very club feeling level, at least in my experience. So my experience with that was at Ohio State. I mean, I went to my residency at Ohio State thinking like, oh, I'm going to show up. It's a sports residency. I'm going to work with the Ohio State football team. Like, dude, sign me up. Like, this is going to be amazing. And they're like, you're working with rugby. I'm like, what the hell is rugby? That's the thing with the football shaped ball, right? Like, but I don't know. I couldn't have told you any rules. Needless to say, I learned a lot. And you talk about emergency medicine. If there's a place to get some emergency medicine, it's rugby. I was there all of 5 minutes before I had to spine board somebody. I mean, it was like a thing, right? Like, what am I doing here? This was an awesome experience. And then I played some rugby for the next 5 or 6 years. I still play a little bit now, club, just kind of local and club stuff. But that was my first experience in rugby. Spent some time at Ohio State, and then did a traveling tour for 2 summers in a row where I was the primary physio for a semi-pro team here in the U.S. called Tiger Academy Rugby. And so for the summer, I traveled with them, did all their coverage, and kind of immersed myself in that. I would have loved to stay in it, but like most things, right, you got to make a decision financially at some point, and that's not exactly the most lucrative direction and facet of PT. So I kind of got away from it a little bit, but I still love it, man. It's fantastic.
Yeah. What position did you play when you were playing, or I guess even now?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the side and how good they are. Realistically, I'll play on the wing because I'm fast. I'm shaped. I mean, if it's 7s or 15s, right? If it's a smaller side, I'll run like a 12 or inside, outside, center, 12 or 13. But my position primarily is a 9. So I'm a primary scrum half that likes to run because, I mean, I'm shaped like a bridge troll. So, you gotta play to your strengths. I'm not getting any taller. I turn into more of a triangle. So you just imagine like a hobbit troll just running as a 9. People don't like to hit, like, especially if you can get to the second or third, phase. Oh yeah. Yeah. So I don't mind. I grew up playing football, so contact is not an issue for me. And so a running contact 9 was my jam. So, yeah.
Where are you from initially? What's this accent?
So it's a conglomeration of the places I've lived. I'm from Louisiana. It'll come out, thick and authentic every now and then. If you get me home for a week or two, and maybe with a couple of adult sodas, yeah, you'll get some authentic Cajun South Louisiana roll, but I don't even know what my accent is at this point. It's worldly, I guess, if that's a thing. So
yeah, when you moved to New Zealand, when you were in Auckland, what was the most immediate thing you noticed that was different compared to the U.S.? And then did they immediately start calling you out on your accent? Because
oh yeah. But the funny thing, right, is like accents are always fascinating, regardless of the accent, as long as it's not native. So people loved my accent because it wasn't New Zealand, right? I mean, for the same reason that if you're Australian, New Zealand, Scouse, Manchester, like if you have an accent, you come to the U.S., people are fascinated by it, right? So it's the same way that direction. The thing was getting comfortable saying mate all the time and cheers, right? Like that's the thing. So you got to get comfortable saying mate and cheers after everything. Cheers is thank you. It's hello. It's goodbye. It's how you doing. It's all the things. But the first thing I noticed was the size. When people say like, what did you notice? What was the thing that you took away from New Zealand that shocked you? Is the size. And I don't mean the size of the island. I mean the size of everything. Take the U.S., shrink it by 33%. And you get New Zealand, the size of the roads, the size of the cars, the size of the portion sizes, the size of the food, your options. The way I describe it is like if you went to the grocery, you're going to have 2 types of peanut butter. They're both very good, very middle of the road, middle plus, but they're both good. You're not going to get like the $20 jar of peanut butter. You're also not going to find the $2 jar of peanut butter. It's all, $8 to $10, if that makes sense. With the U.S., right, you can find these really far ends, something really cheap, something really, really, prestigious and kind of exotic. You're not going to find that in New Zealand. They kind of live right in the middle, and they're all happy with it, right? They just want sunshine, and they want to get their stuff done and go home. Like, it's just culturally, it is not as capitalistic. It's not as aggressive and forward-leaning, for better or worse, right? And that, again, I think there's positives and negatives to that concept. But again, for me, it blew my mind. I got there. I'll never forget this. I get there on like a Thursday or a Wednesday, I think. I meet everybody. I go up to the university. I'm talking with all these things that we're going to get going. Friday comes around. I'm kind of still running and gunning, kind of getting stuff done. I send an email out Saturday morning, and I get a call like from one of my advisors. It's like, Chris, yo, you got to cut that out. Like, this whole like email thing on Saturday, that's not going to fly. And I said, like, oh, I'm sorry. And he was kidding, but he was very serious. He's like, hey, we're not answering emails on Saturday. Are you out of your mind? Like, cut that out. And so that set the tone of, oh, okay, got it. Go home, enjoy the beach, enjoy the pace of life. It was amazing. I mean, the culture, it was awesome. So, yeah.
I have a few questions off that. One, what was the decision to go for the master's? And then how did you even find that program and choose that one above all the others? And then after that, just reflections on the overall environment compared to the other settings that you were in prior and after, whether it's Ohio State or some of the hospital settings you were in Houston or Louisville, like overall just differences that you noticed.
Yeah. So to your first question, why the master's? I'm an immersive learner. I know that about myself. I am very bad. I'm very bad personally at like doing things and kind of reading. Like, if I'm going to do it, if it's on the periphery for me, it's just not effective. If I'm going to go learn how to do on-field coverage, I want to go work with a team. I want to be there every day. I want to learn that craft. I want to really immerse myself. So that was a decision. I was really interested in biomechanics, in physics, in kinetics. Like, I got to the point where I spent 6.5 years truly immersed in hospital-based medicine. So I learned so much working with physicians and with PAs, with high-functioning clinicians, about research, about postoperative care, about surgical management in the ORs, developing programs. I felt really good about that. What I didn't feel so great about is I still didn't feel comfortable with a strength and conditioning concept at a physiologic level. I wanted more of that. I wanted to understand testing. I wanted to understand kinetics, the difference between kinetics and kinematics. I wanted to understand biomechanics. I really wanted a clinical physics degree. So I started looking. The problem is I wasn't quite ready. I had my own vision in my head. I didn't want to go join a formal academic program that was going to be didactic exclusively. Right. So you can go, I looked at programs at Leeds in the UK, really throughout the world. I've got a spreadsheet. These programs were student academic positions, right? I was going to go be a student, take a loan, get a master's, not have an opportunity to work. I was going to be a student going to class. I mean, I was at the time, this was, 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. So you can imagine, I'm like, at this point, I've got all this education and now I'm going to go back. It was going to be tough for me to navigate that financially. So to bring it all the way full circle, in Houston, I worked with a group called ATH, with Athlete Training and Health. They partnered with some groups out in Auckland with AUT, which is Auckland University of Technology. They had some interest and were interested specifically in the medical human performance side of testing. Like, kind of getting into this domain with force plates and load cells and this and that. And I'm like, oh man, I'm in. What do you guys have from an IRB already? And they're like, well, we have some arms and some things in place. Would you be interested in some of these areas? And I'm like, oh, hell yeah. Like, that's exactly what I want to do. And then they came back and said, just to be clear, this is not an academic. It's not a didactic. Sorry. It's not a didactic master's. You're going to have essentially open access. Your days are yours. There are no classes. Like your day, you can create the curriculum around what you want to do. Your job is to become a content expert by doing what it takes to get there. If that's going to take classes online, talking with people. So the majority of my day, we're calling people, reading podcasts, videos. I applied to a few courses. That's really where I generated my academic side, and then I got to apply it. So the value for me was that is it let me be, we'll call it an adult learner with the free time to do it. And that's why I picked the program, and that's why I went with them. I spoke to them a few times on the phone. We totally hit it off, and they're like, "Oh man, yeah, so you're going to do this in Houston?" And I'm like, "Oh no. I'm going to move to New Zealand." And I'll never forget John Cronin, who's a really good friend. He was my advisor. He said, "You're gonna move to New Zealand?" I said, "John, I know you don't know me very well, but when I say I'll move to New Zealand, I'm going to move to New Zealand." He said, "Okay, sure." And I could hear in his voice, he's like, "This guy ain't moving to New Zealand." And then 3 months later, I was in New Zealand. So, yeah, it was such a cool experience. And to me, that was the first time in my career that I had autonomy to create my own learning experience. For better or worse, it was sink or swim because, right, PT school, didactic, linear. Residency, didactic, fairly linear. Fellowship, not as didactic, I'd say, but again, end goal oriented. There was some curriculum associated with that. Houston, exposure, reps, like call it what you want. That was just in the trenches, kind of getting exposure. This was sink or swim. Whatever you get out of this is what you put in it. And so for me, it was, I think, a really valuable growth opportunity to figure out, like, when I say I want to do this thing, what does that mean? And so I kind of dumped myself into it. It was the best decision I ever made. I mean, the amount that it changed my practice, the way it changed my practice, the way it changed my way of thinking. I mean, I could have never, I don't know that I would have gotten that had I not had the ability to do that and manufacture it on my own. So that's how I looked at it anyway.
And then to more of the second question with the overall state of where they're at with research and preferences in, obviously you'd mentioned they have probably better work-life boundaries, but from a physio department that you were helping out with, from how they conducted research, what was the standards compared to some of these other settings you're in, and just compared to the US in general?
Yeah, I mean, there's still obviously a massive dogma in New Zealand still associated with the kind of manual therapy ideology. And again, not in a bad way. I just think that that's still very prevalent for them. However, what blew me away is their progressiveness was not expected. For a country that seems conservative, when I got there and I meet with the faculty, I'll never forget, it was like the first meeting I'm meeting with all of the faculty that I'm associated with on the MSK side, on the ortho side of the curriculum. And they're like, "So we've heard you talk a couple of times. You've got some pretty interesting thoughts about treatment and ideology around strength and conditioning and utilization of load and dosage and this and that and biomechanics. You have our full support to do whatever you want." And I'm like, are you sure? I mean, you guys you sure about this? Like, oh yeah, absolutely. We want to operate a little bit. And the reason I think is because they have the ability, in New Zealand specifically, because the way university is organized, right? College is high school everywhere else in the world. University is college to the US, if that makes sense. You're essentially you're in an undergrad degree, like you're leaving high school and going into physical therapy or physiotherapy, which is what it's called there, right? So it's not this, you got a degree and then now you're specializing. This is what you're doing. So individuals, it's sink or swim. There's 2 universities, there's limited spots. They are fully prepared to fail people. half of the class is going to fail. I mean, staggering number. And they are impersonal about it, to be candid. It was like, yeah, here's the expectation. You meet the hurdles and the gates. That's it. You know, this is what it is. And so as you get further in the curriculum, and I was teaching the second and third years, they were really, really high on critical thinking, and I freaking loved it. They were very open and willing to allow for some, we'll call it, you know, appropriately exploratory decision-making, critical thinking, more that kind of raw learning, clinical care learning experience that I wasn't familiar with because that's not how I was educated, right? And that's not what the U.S., I think, prides ourselves on, which is a bit more linear, right? Very much more dichotomous. This is the thing. You learn these things. You do the things. It's not quite as heavy on the periphery. And so that blew me away. I was not expecting them to be, again, culturally, I was expecting conservative. So I was very much surprised and encouraged by that. I worked with some, oh God, they were awesome people. I still speak to them every now and then. They're just really good humans. And that comes across in the way they educate. They're very much invested in their students, but they expect a lot. And I think that relationship is something, I mean, I really loved it, to be honest with you. I miss that side of things. Having the opportunity to teach in that manner was really cool.
So leaving New Zealand, coming back, and then eventually transitioning to the military, special forces, what was attractive about that position and that setting and demographic initially?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, when I left New Zealand, when I was leaving New Zealand, we'll say, so at that point, right, I had taught in physio and physical therapy schools, right? Because part of my residency, I taught in Louisville, at a college called Bellarmine University. I taught in their physical therapy program. I was teaching, in Houston. So I had done that thing. I had done primary research, both in Ohio and in Houston. I had worked with college sports and done some consultancy with some pro sport programs. Never been officially an employee of a pro program, but I had consulted and done some work with them. I had done on-field coverage. I had done some strength and conditioning, specifically programmed at that point. When I got to Houston, I was working with a few colleges in Houston and done a bit with them as well. So I had kind of done all the things. I'd worked in big hospital sports medicine. So I had seen all these facets of PT and liked some, didn't like others. The military was, for me, a bit of a foreign. It was an outlier. It was that one thing that I'm like, I haven't done that. I'm interested in it because it serviced a few of my desires, and that was I wanted to give back to those that serve. I never have served. I've never been a part of the military formally. So that was an opportunity to check that box. And I was really interested in doing that. I almost joined the military 4 years into my PT school, or my PT career. Sorry. When I was going to go to New Zealand, right before that, I actually almost joined the Air Force. That's a whole nother talk, but yeah, end up not doing it. But so I wanted to check that box. Number two, it was a unique population that I felt was also underserved. Because you don't hear much about it, right? It is, for a long time, it was kind of the grit grunt mentality of the military. You push up, sit ups, run. That's who you are. Do the thing. And they started to evolve that in a human performance mindset. And I'm like, cool, that'd be cool to get in on the kind of the ground level or the early phases of that. And it happened to come true. And now, I mean, I really enjoy what I do. The people, it's awesome. It's very different because it's early. Imagine college and pro sports 10 years ago, maybe even 15 or 20 years ago in certain areas. They're still developing what you would consider the true philosophy of what you want. Testing, how to test, what is testing, substratifications, clinical data, normalization of data, population specifics, all these things that are just not familiar to them. And so I thought it was going to be, a cool experience to get into, and it's turned out to be the case. It's been a lot of fun in a lot of ways. So that's really what drove me to the military and what's kept me there for the last, I guess, over 2 years at this point. So
we have a few topics within military, and we can go wherever you want to start. But I am curious, once you kind of like when you moved to Auckland, I'm sure there were some eye-opening experiences initially going into that setting. So what things stood out immediately during that transition?
There's a lot of them, right? But one of them that blew me away is, most people don't know that there's three different, there's more than three, but there's really three big components about how to work with the military. You can be active duty, and active duty or reserve would both be an actual, right? Like, you're a military member, a service member. There's a government service contract, and then there's a contractor. Those are all different positions that can all work within the military. When I got there, the thing that blew me away is, if you're a medical provider, you're an officer. If you're active duty or a reservist, you are an officer, okay? Imagine having a job, let's say as a PT, but also having a totally separate job of being a service member. So as a physician, as a PT, you're having to do all the things that are required of you to be an officer. So all the courses, the skills, doing all the critiques, the peer reviews. I mean, going to PT, right? Going to your morning physical training, right? Exercises, being held to the Army standards, doing all the stuff that makes you military. Oh, and by the way, you're also a PT. So then you need to do all the Con Ed, all the education, all the investment, all the mentorship, all the learning, all the growth, seeing the patients. So you have two jobs simultaneously. Imagine that as a surgeon. It's the same thing. So you're having to do these things, and oh, by the way, go do fellowship training in joints. It is really, really taxing on individuals, because it's pulling you in seemingly opposite directions. That was the first thing that blew me away. I'm like, oh man, I never considered that. So it gives you a much more profound appreciation for those doing that. The second thing, for better or worse, is the state of the military at a physical level. Is we've seen a decline in physical preparation, and that's a concern, right? Is because recruitment throughout the Army, and this is no surprise and certainly no secret. You can read this anywhere. Meeting recruitment numbers has been down, and it always waxes and wanes, right? Based on wars, based on, obviously the last time that we really had a spike in recruitment, as you guys would probably imagine, would be, post 9/11, and then around kind of the war on terror. That makes sense, right? That drives it. In these lulls, you get a decline, and it's hard to recruit people. And so you do see what you hope isn't true, but a decline in our requisite gates and hurdles to get into the military. So physically, that was both impressive and unimpressive, because you get really wide deviations in individuals coming in. And the third thing that blew me away, so if I asked you guys, like, describe to me, like, what when I say the word, military member, or, an individual that's in the Army, what did you think about in your head? Like, seriously, like a serious question. What comes to mind? Like, tell me what you see.
I see like an active duty member dressed up walking through the airport. It's my immediate thought.
Nice. Okay, what role do they, like, what's their position? What do you see them doing day to day?
Training and preparing for potentially a war somewhere.
Yeah, right. And that's exactly right. That's what most people think of. Sam, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we have lawyers, we have cooks, we have engineers, we have librarians, right? So these are not the people you're thinking of, right? People that are in intel, people that don't, I mean, again, do they do basic training and do they learn how to use a weapon? Of course, but that is not their primary skill set. So physically, do you think that everybody in the military should be adhering to a level of physical competence when the likelihood of that, I mean, it's a very difficult question to answer. The short answer is yes. Everybody, because you're in the military, you could be put in a position that you are on the ground. But I can tell you right now, if your cooks are out there on the front lines, then things have gone awry. right? Like, infantry is going to be there because that's what they do. But the supportive personnel, and there's direct support, there's indirect support, and kind of layers away from the front line, if you can think about it that way. So, you know, these third, fourth order away, you don't think about these individuals. Nobody thinks about these, right? Because it's not in your head. You're thinking, oh, this is the shooter. Like, I'm thinking of front lines infantry. That's what people think of. And that's not who the Army, I mean, that's some of the Army and the military, but it's not all of them. So when you think of, well, yeah, they need to be prepared, it's like, okay, but how do you define that? And should you hold the infantry, the front lines, to the same physical demands as somebody that's going to be desk working, or otherwise? It's a very difficult thing to answer. And I just wasn't, like, as a civilian, most of us are not prepared to that.
And so, to make sure I understand correctly, everyone in the military has an initial baseline, and then once you divide up past that, is there a secondary baseline that you need? No.
I mean, theoretically, yes.
So no,
as you work your way, if you become more specialized, there may be some additional hurdles. Yeah. But the Army fitness test, like the APFT, Army Physical Fitness Assessment or test, is universal and kind of generic across the entire Army. Now, as you move your way up to different specialties or different tiers or, different, groups, they may have other hurdles to meet to rank yourself along. But at a general level, no. Across the board, to get into the Army, the military, there are certain things the hurdles that have to be hit. Yeah, and that's, again, it's odd because we don't think that way.
So I'm understanding correctly. Right now, you're only working in special forces. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's special forces, special operations. I mean, these are kind of nebulous terms. I mean, I could get into the nuances of it, but it probably would just gobble up time. And for most people, it's just, I'm doing things with individuals that are a little bit more specialized, we'll say, and a little bit more skill oriented. But it brings up a good talking point of, as you progress and you get older in the military and things of that nature, should you be expected, as you become more skilled, do you need to also maintain your capacity of physical preparedness? It's a really difficult question, right? Is because you could think about a variety of things, like, let's take a sniper or something. Like, that individual is going to be in a position for a fair bit of time. Does that position require the same physical requirements as somebody that's going to be, your infantry that's running, jumping, that may be standing around for periods of time, that's going to be in a group of people? Are these things the same? No, they're not. Physically, psychologically, neurocognitively, they're not the same people. But the military is figuring this out now, right? In the same way that 10 years ago, if you played soccer, the goalies ran the same as everybody else, right? Like, think about it that way. We are just now getting to the point, in my opinion, where that's an agreed upon tactic. That, no, a goalie in soccer has a specific requisite type of energy systems and muscular performance and kinetic traits that are valuable for that position versus a midfielder. That wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago, right? At all. Everybody did the same thing. Your goalies ran, 2 miles like everybody else. The military is still a little bit that way.
So what on the day-to-day does it look like for you in regards to, are you just seeing one patient at a time? Are you doing these bigger, Yeah, is that what it looks like? And then
yeah. Go ahead.
What with these different subsets of specialty individuals, how are you differentiating your testing, your assessments? Because as you acknowledge, they are so different with these demands.
Yeah. So luckily, I'm in a position now where we have a lot of time allocated per client, which is nice, right? When I was in Houston, that was not the case. And let me be very clear. I really enjoyed what I did in Houston. It was very much immersive. I'll say that. Like, it was busy. I saw a lot. I kind of generated an enormous amount of personal, clinical, anecdotal, but certainly personal clinical expertise. You see things, you can really recognize them, and you get efficient. Now I have much more time to kind of devote to those individuals, which, I love. I really get a chance to meet and interact with my individuals as much as I need to. To your second question, it's the same thing that you would do if you got with any team. You're doing it at a group or a smaller section level of similar individuals, where you're doing a reverse engineer or needs analysis, whatever term you want to apply to specific kinetic principles that they're going to do, like force profiling essentially, and energy systems profiling in the same way. Right. And so I try to get with them, ask as many questions as I can around the demands of their job, of their skill set, of whatever that is, get as much information as I can acquire, reverse engineer that, needs analysis the crap out of it, and say, okay, here's the biggest ticket items. Based on where you are right now, here's how we get you to that pyramid top. Because, like I said earlier, do I need to put somebody through a rigorous, alactic, repeat alactic threshold work that is going to be doing intel or loggy, which is like inventory and, like logistics management? No. But if I look at them, what's the thing that keeps you from doing your job? General comorbidities, right? So if I can lower your all-cause mortality, then I'm doing the military a favor. Right, because I'm keeping you in your job, because they don't have to train somebody else if we lose you to sickness, to any morbidities and mortalities. Right, like we'll call it the common cold all the way to low back pain that causes you to miss, 5, 10, 20, 30 days a year. So I look at it that way. What's your job? What's the lowest common denominator? What's the minimum effective dose? Are you meeting that? Then you earn the right for me to really say, okay, let's maximize your performance. To me, in sports medicine and sports performance, we've gotten really far into the performance domain. The majority of our research looks at moving the 1% to 2% further to the right, which is awesome. Let me be very clear. However, 85% of humans on this planet don't meet weekly physical requirements. And in some cases, the military is no different. So do I really need to be pushing you to this theoretic endpoint to bump you to the right? Like, dude, no. Like, let's have a conversation about how you're getting your minimums. And is the military doing a good job of that? In some places, yes. In some places, no. But I need to explore that to say, like, what's your week like? What are your goals and priorities? And that is what I've found. That's the jam. That's the money. That's the real value. Because again, at the end of the day, your good people are good for a reason anyway. I can spend an enormous amount of time for a very little ROI, or I can spend what's actually a little bit of time for a lot of ROI. And certainly that's population dependent, but for me, it's been amazing. The majority of I do is polarizing opposite. It's either I'm working on somebody that's way on the right or somebody that's way on the left. It's very rarely like in the middle, as weird as that seems. So I'm writing programs of general conditioning work capacity and minimum effective dose, kind of minimal requirements, lowering what I tell them, like lowering ACM. And they're like, what's ACM? I'm like, all cause mortality. They're like, what's that? I'm like, anything that makes you that brings you down, right? That anything that marginalizes, or I'm sorry, that increases your health span versus lifespan, that maximizes that, anything that creates that. And they're like, oh, okay, here's the things that make the biggest returns on that. No, you don't need to make your back squat 20 more pounds. That's irrelevant. Let's talk about how to get you in the gym 3 days a week. Let's 2 resistance days a week with 3 to 4 days of general aerobic exercise, getting somewhere close to 150 minutes of moderate intensity. Let's talk about that. I don't really care how you get there. I really don't, because all ACM doesn't care about that either, right? Like, your all-cause mortality doesn't care. It's not gonna care. And then I have to put this, turn my hat around and go the different direction of saying, all right, dude, let's talk about your abilities at a very high level. Heart rate management under really, really intense and adverse situations. So can I put you through the ringer, have you do some repeats, some alactic or lactate repeats, and then fire a weapon for accuracy, then do some cognitive tasks for accuracy. So you can see what I mean, right? Like, you're getting really, really different spectrums of that, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I find this really fascinating, but it sounds like you're describing a lot more of like the performance overall side of things versus like the rehabby side of things.
Yep.
So do you play a role more on that side, or do you see a lot of people that are in like pain post-injury?
Both. And that's the uniqueness of the position that I'm in. I was hired for that purpose. And that's what really like perked my ears up when they said, you're going to see a variety. You're going to have autonomy and full latitude to kind of develop what you see, and build on that. And I'm like, sweet. Like, I want to do that. I'm good at that. There was a question, it was like, if I could give you 3 things in the gym, or 3 things for your practice, what can we give you? I'm like, I need a load cell. I need some version of accommodating resistance, whether that's a series of kettlebells, some easily changeable dumbbells, right? Like your power blocks, or some kind of, modified titrated exposure. And then some place to do some energy systems. So a bike, a rower, it doesn't really matter. And they're like, oh, as a PT? And I'm like, yeah, that's all I need. That's really all I need. I mean, I'm assuming I'll have a table. So, outside of that, like, yeah, dude, we'll make it work. I can make do with all these things. And so they knew kind of what they were getting is like, yeah, I'm going to come in. I'm an exercise minded individual that really wants to promote that, because I feel like the ancillary benefits of being physically active are just, I mean, like, I don't need to say it, because I hope you and your listeners would agree with, like, yeah, there's nothing that beats it. This just doesn't happen. So we could be better at dosage, and I think we could be better as a profession of encouragement and not discouragement, which is a big message for me. Is I tell people all the time, tell me what you want to do, I'll program it. Right? Initially, if you don't have a goal, if you're, Sam, to your point, like, performance on the right, health and wellness on the left, everything in between. If you tell me that I want to be more health conscious, like, I want to be better. Okay. Do you have something coming up? A race, a specific thing? Do you want to ride a bike more? Do you have anything that's specific that is going to tailor me to a kind of the SAID principle, right? If they say no, I'm like, sweet. Well, newsflash, we can get there one of 500 ways. And I promise you, all I need from you is a simple direction. What do you like to do? Because consistency and continuity are all that matters. You just tell me what you want to do, I'll program it. Easy as that.
Do you, because it's those two ends of the spectrum, is there one of those two that feels consistently more difficult for either coming up with a plan and being consistent? And then I guess a second part of that would be from an outcomes perspective. How are you tracking outcomes for the population that you're just trying to be more generally active, and then the population that has very, very high level demands to return to?
Yeah, that what you just asked, the second part of that question is by far the toughest. The reason is, in the majority of, we'll call it sports performance, it is exactly that, right? It is sport oriented. Relatively speaking, the demands of the sport. Like football has a set of rules. The rules maintain fair consistency, right? Like the field size, the how you score, the general outcomes, the wins, losses, all that stuff. The military is not that easy, right? It's because there is not a consistent goal. What is mission success? Is it if you complete the mission and nobody's injured, nobody's killed, there are not, right? Well, but this person's never going to be there. So is that the same mission success? Like what, how do you define these things? That's the problem entirely across the board is the issue is the outcome is ever changing. And it creates, are you guys familiar with the terms robustness and resilience? Have you heard these terms kind of spoken about before? Right? Like robustness is the ability mechanically and kind of the mechanical engineering concepts of robustness and resilience. Robustness is the ability to tolerate a variety of inputs and not deform. Right. So if you think about this, there's a really good image. You could probably Google it of, it's an image I use and it's from a PowerPoint that talks about like, it's a boxer, it's Muhammad Ali. And it's like robustness is the ability to take a variety of punches without being knocked down. Resilience is once you're knocked down, how long it takes you to get back up. So robustness being more of a prophylactic concept of a variety of exposures, making your net really wide. Resilience is is essentially being an inch wide, but a mile down, right? Where robustness is the opposite. A mile wide, but an inch down. And so I try to describe this to individuals as you have to be a bit of a chameleon because war, battle doesn't care about any specific trait at all. Your capacity to do that thing needs to be good enough. But after that, there's a lot that's going to be just haphazard and happening. So I want you to be able to roll, run, jump, climb, kneel, crawl, shoot, right? Like these things are kind of nebulous. We take things that are likely to happen, and then we try to build those in a y-axis. If that kind of makes sense in your brain, for me, that makes sense. So I try to reverse engineer that and needs analysis that as in what is the role that you do? Let's make you a mile thick or deep in that. Sorry, a mile deep. And then in the things that are possible, we'll keep you a mile wide and maybe an inch deep. That's how I kind of correspond this. And when they hear this, they're like, oh, this makes sense. Is because if I try to make your back squat improve your strength qualities and how we define that, the 3RM deadlift. Do you really need to deadlift twice your body weight? Probably not. Do you probably need to be able to deadlift your body weight or at least the average body weight of a service member if you got to pick them up? Probably, right? So it's like, let's meet that goal. But I don't know that I want to focus on that because I also need to build your cardiovascular capacity if you're on the field and you need to run and then pick somebody up. But if you're like, well, that's not my role. My role is in the motor pool, more of a mechanic and engineer. Well, then you treat that like blue collar work is right? Like any other gen pop. Like, yeah, I need you to be kind of holistically healthy across a variety of things. And so I try my best to drive that point to them. So to your first question, Chris, is like, who's the hardest? They're both hard for different reasons. You're changing ideology. It's an intrinsic capacity on the left, right, on the health and wellness side. On the right, they're usually very highly motivated. It's actually removing things and narrowing their focus a little bit more of, hey, you don't really need to do that stuff. The reason is because it's just the ROI, the juice is not worth the squeeze. And robustness and resilience, I think of front end risk to back end risk. If you deadlift on the front end, it does increase your risk on the front end. In theory, though, to lower your risk on the back end. If you avoid deadlifting, it probably does lower your risk, right? Because you're not doing it on the front end until you got to pick something up, and then your risk is, yeah. So where's that worth it? Where's the line? I think that's a moving target. And I think we need to be a little bit better about using terms, words, language, and expectations for that specifically, because I don't know that we're doing a very good job. And so in my head, I try to profile groups, looking at data norms, and then qualifying that with we'll call it relative risk tolerance and aversion. Who's worth it? Who's not? What's the cost? What's the effect? Am I willing to tolerate that? And ultimately give that to the leadership and say, hey, here's what I think. But at the end of the day, we got to remember, it's not about us. The leadership makes those decisions.
It's obviously different than a competitive season because there's a start and an end, and you have potentially an off season. With these individuals that you may be working with for months or years, you're probably getting a lot of data points as they go coming back and forth from whatever obligations they have. Are you doing specific objective testing with these groups consistently to just gather information when they're injured, when they're healthy? And if so, let's just keep it at the higher end groups.
Yeah.
What type of testing are you doing just based off the access of equipment?
Yeah, so I won't be able to give you specifics for a variety of reasons. I won't be able to get into like the real nuance of the testing. I can give you some generalities around that. But I will say the answer to your question is yes. I'm a big believer in singular data points largely mean very little. And in any biometric data, heart rate, even your blood labs, right? Like that is very dangerous to look at that in absolute isolation. I have no idea what your labs, what any of that stuff is or was, or we don't know. So to your point, you need multiple data points, right? One is a data point. Two is a comparison. Three creates a trend. And trends are what matters because we want to see the longevity and the durability and the change, the delta over time, right? What's the rate change? How much is that changing? What does that look like and why? Can we identify areas? So to your point, Chris, is like, are we peaking? Are we always kind of fluctuating? And if we're hovering around a standard deviation around their mean, right, of training for an effect, recovering for preparation, then that's what I'm looking for. So it's more this kind of Z-score phenomenon that you're taking these standard deviations and then looking at groups and group comparisons, if you have that data. The problem is you can't compare groups to groups to groups. You need to compare like groups. And you can't really take the military and compare that to civilians. Unless you have like an engineer and you compare them to other engineers, right? That may work, but there's certainly other things that aren't that way. So to your point, I really like longitudinal testing, but I like to make it simple, very simple. And if we don't know what matters, the last thing I want is 40 tests, because testing fatigue will drive people away from compliance, and you'll end up losing people, right? You'll have people that won't come back, because at the end of the day, if it's not mandated by leadership, then they're not. I mean, nobody has any obligation unless it's authoritatively dictated, right? If the officers, if the leaders, if whoever that is makes that decision, like the APFT, the Army, the physical fitness test, right? If leadership says this is what you guys are going to do, this is what you're going to do. And so everybody's going to train to that test. For better or worse, you can train to that test. So we do have data points in that way, but I really like having data points across a period so we can see undulations and fluctuations. So to your questions, what do I like? I like at least 2 or 3 biometric data points, and that would be some lab values, a pretty eclectic lab panel. Now, again, I'm not reading that. I want to be very clear. We have individuals on the medical side that are going to read that, but I do think that that's really, really valuable. I like some type of, and I know I'll take flack for this, but I do like heart rate variability, like Aura or Whoop or something like that. I don't like Whoop as much as I like Aura. but I want to see massive trends. I am not interested in your Whoop data for a week. I'm not interested in your Oura Ring data for a week. It doesn't mean anything to me. I want to look at month to month to month, 6 months to 6 months to, if they're willing to tolerate that, like wearing that device, because that's going to at least give me, it's going to fluctuate, no doubt, but I'm looking for, again, 2 standard deviations, big changes in deviations, not these, general humanistic variability, right? So I do like those 2 things. And then I really like some version of subjective quality, just a question or 2 about their well-being, how they feel. And I usually offer a few questions to them, and that would be how you're feeling, how you feel like your training is going, how you feel from a physical wellness and well-being standpoint. 0 to 10, and it's really just a question, ultimately, to figure out how they feel currently and how things are changing for them, and how kind of run down that they start to feel. That's on the biometric side, and then on the cognitive side. On the physical side, I'm looking at, depending on the group, but I really like, so we have some Kaiser equipment. So I really like using some Kaiser power profiling, mostly because I'm taking a percentage of body weight, or some version of body weight where it's 70, 80%. All the Kaiser devices are a little unique, so it's not transferable, and it's not weight, right? It's pressure, so it's hard. But the nice thing about it is the risk of injury is lower, right? And I'm giving a maximal effort, let's say a bench or a leg press or an iso mid-thigh pull. I can do all that. That's a relative effort. That I can longitudinally track. So, for instance, they'll do like a single RM max effort power production, so that the load is light enough. It's not a maximal effort 1 RM, but I'm looking at peak power. And you could say, well, that's messy, and I'm like, yep, sure is. But if I hurt somebody, then what? Like, I got to answer for that. So, where's the middle? For me, this makes the most sense for my population. We'll also do some MAS testing, so some max aerobic stuff, whether that's a 6-minute max effort bike for calorie, bike for watts, bike for distance, like a 1,200 meter or a 1,500 meter run, a 6-minute row for time. Again, like I tell them, I don't really care. I just want something that you're going to do again in 2 years. You're going to do again. Yeah, that's exactly. So I can see what the differences are. Because if you can't run, then it kind of sinks me, because I can compare that a little bit. And you could say, well, yeah, you could do VO2 testing. You're right. You can. Is that worth it? Is that worth that time? Do you have the equipment? Not everybody has that. Is that worth it to you? I honestly don't know. And I honestly don't care, to be fair. I want something that I can reproduce. That the likelihood that I'm a little less risk tolerant for that exact reason, is that worth it to me today? Because at the end of the day, you're a soldier. You're not a football player. Your vertical jump height, valuable for sure. Does that make you a good soldier? I don't know. I don't know that there's anything that says that. So being appropriate in those metrics, I like to look at general concepts of, I'm never doing a 1RM test for the reasons of, just because I'm less risk tolerant. The ACFT, which is the Army Combat Physical Test, is a 3RM hex bar deadlift. We get people hurt all the time. And it's like, right, is that worth it? Well, I do think you need a deadlift. Is it what about a 5RM? Well, the further you get away from a 1R, the less accurate it gets. Like, I get the arguments. I really do. I don't believe that there's the right or wrong answer. I just hope people understand the error of each of the metrics. And so what I've chosen to do is these things because it feels like it gets me valuable information. They can do it on their own, so they can retest without me being there. I just write the protocol. So if that gives you some insight into it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And at the end of the day, something like VO2 max, sure, it's interesting to know, but it doesn't actually tell us your ability for performance.
Nope.
especially because in a lot of people, it might not actually change once you're in later adult years.
Right.
Not even that late, like middle age. And whereas we can absolutely still improve your mitochondrial function, we can improve all these different metrics that will make a meaningful improvement in your maximal aerobic abilities. So, no, I think sounds like you're doing an incredibly comprehensive job and choosing some very smart tests that still give you great performance metrics with low risk concern and, like you said, repeatability. Like you're not necessary for the ability to measure a lot of these things, which is then hopefully going to allow, greater reliability in the testing between other clinicians, maybe more reliability if someone else chooses to do it like by themselves, and just keep monitoring this for a long time.
Yeah, and I will do some specific testing, to be very clear. Like I'm obviously a big fan of the load cell device. I don't get any kickback or feedback or any monetary compensation, but the Tendec device, as I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with, is such a user-friendly device. I use this all the time. Now I use this for specifics. If I have certain groups that are interested in those things, I will piggyback that on. For instance, if you're an engineer, part of the engineer corps, if you're part of infantry that wants to do a little bit, then I can bias the tests a little bit. If you've got some prior injury, if low back considerations, then we'll do a Sorensen, we'll do a reverse Sorensen, hold for time. I'll put my phone on their feet as a level. And so just use it as like essentially a time-based endurance hold, using my phone as a level and adjusting how far their feet drop. I give them a warning, same old stuff. And then I'll do some specific joint testing, using the load cell when it's appropriate. I just, do I really want to do that on everybody? It's probably a lot of effort for something that, like if you're working with a group of baseball players, shoulder injuries are such a high component, then yeah, it's probably worth that. I genuinely feel like you should do that. I mean, I can't do that on every joint because every joint is at risk in my individuals, right? Like it's so varied. So I don't know that it's worth the time, and I don't have the bandwidth to do that on everybody. So it's not worth it to me. I'll do it in specific cases. If you have shoulder pain, have had a history of surgical intervention on your shoulder, et cetera, then we'll do some force profiling, specifically peak force, and I'll convert that to torque and torque to body weight in almost every case, just so I can compare across populations if I really want to. But I'll do that when it's appropriate. It's just not appropriate for everybody, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, it'd be really time intensive, and you also don't necessarily know if it's going to be providing much return. And does it inherently change what you would have done for training purposes anyways?
Nope. I mean, you're exactly right. I genuinely feel that we can work around that. I have no problem with manual muscle testing for the purposes of dichotomous. Can you give maximal effort and not hurt? Check. I'm not grading it as a degree of strength or force. I'm just grading it as dichotomously yes or no. You can give maximal effort and it doesn't hurt. Okay, cool. That's fine with me for right now. I'm still going to train you. Part of your program is going to include some version of shoulder strength development, both physiologically, muscular endurance, probably some deviations into higher load and maximal effort, maybe some higher rate, higher joint velocity stuff potentially if it suits your job and job description. But largely, I'm going to do that stuff anyway. So if you can make effort, cool. That's all I want to know. I just want to make sure if I ask you to do a thing, you're not going to stop because it hurts. Yeah,
So maybe wrapping up here, if you were to go back to the civilian sector in a few weeks, what would you take away or implement now that you've spent time in the military setting, if anything? And then what would your recommendations be for other potentially members or physios or rehab providers in the military of things that you think would be highly beneficial in this particular setting?
Yeah, I think to the second part of that question, the thing I would say to providers in the military is be brave. It is the time to be brave as much as you can within parameters, right? Like left and right limits. But be brave in developing, because for as much as you think that the military has kind of organized, it's not. It is not at any level as far as I'm aware. Everybody is trying to navigate and figure this out. So be brave, try to develop a little bit, work on some data collection tactics, ask questions like, can we try this? Can we do this in this way? Can we collect data? Start collecting and analyzing data. If you don't feel comfortable analyzing it, that's one thing as well, but you can always look at trends. That's not hard. You can plot that in Excel. It'll take you 5 minutes. So data collection side of things, be brave in developing that, as opposed to it's just easy to get captivated and just doing the thing all the time, day in and day out. Because military medicine, largely what I've spoken about is the group that and the groups outside of what are called the MTFs, the medical training or treatment facilities. Sorry, medical treatment facilities. Right. So you go on base, any base, there's a hospital there. Right? That hospital services the base. It's just like a hospital that you will find in any city. It's the same exact thing. There are PTs in there doing inpatient, doing outpatient. They're getting constantly bombarded like you would imagine in any hospital system. It is no different. When you start getting out of those ranks and some of the more specialized groups, there's a little more nuance and ability. So for those people not in those MTFs, be brave. For those people in those MTFs, it is tough, really, really hard, because it is a grind. And as much as you can to try to focus yourself and try to create, change policies to be more aligned, I would encourage that, because in many cases it's a see what you get, right? You're there, first person available, you just kind of get dumped on. There's no continuity. There's no consistency. Yeah, I know it's rough. As a provider, you can imagine how difficult that would be. You just sit there and it's like, I saw Chris on Monday, Sam on Wednesday, and then the other Chris on Friday. It's really, really, so try as much as you can. And I know it's easy for me to sit there and say that, and I'm sure some of your listeners that are in the military are going to say, dude, that sounds lovely, but I can't do that. As much as you can, within reason. I think that's where things need to change. And then what would I take into the private sector? Well, the thing that again, my practice, and I would consider myself pretty well versed in sports performance, in that domain. I'm telling you, I have completely kind of revolutionized my thinking towards minimum effective dose, being a little bit more tolerant and meeting people where they are more often to build equity, because I think I was probably doing a little less of that before I really got in the military and started experiencing that. My last 3 or 4 years have really changed the way that I practice medicine, mostly because I feel so strongly about lifting the basement in many cases, because the ROI is so massive. And that's what I would take. I would be much more tolerant and lenient with individuals. I'd be, and I wasn't a no person before, but I am less of a no person now. If you came in, Sam, and were like, hey man, I got back pain, this and that, and this, but like lifting is life, right? I'd be like, cool, man, let's figure out a way to get you there. Now, short-term modification may turn into long-term modification. I hope not, but I'm here to tell you that we'll make a short-term modification for a purpose. We'll reevaluate. If it's not in the cards, I promise you, I will get you to something that will be satisfying. And that's my goal. That's what I want to get for you. Is I want to tell you never to run again. We're going to find a way for you to run. It may not be how you want to run. It may not be how you run or how you've ran for the last 10 or 15 years. That's okay, but I'm going to get you something, because we cannot afford to keep doing what we're doing, and that is this the pandemic of anti and no. It just got to stop, because I'm seeing this in real time, as I'm sure everybody else is. I would take that back. I would certainly be more open, willing, and accommodating, and then I would try to do more education. I don't know that I did, and that's easy for me to say because of the time allocation that I have for my clients now. When I was seeing a lot of patients in Houston, it would have been tougher, but I spend a lot of time in interaction education at the moment. And the feedback is just, I can't even tell you how valuable it is. It's truly amazing how much I get out of an extra 10 minutes of, hey, do you want me to talk you through some of this stuff? And like, does that, and they're like, actually, I've never considered that. And I appreciate that you're giving me options and kind of giving me, it's like teach a person to fish kind of thing, right? Like I really, really love that. It is a passion of mine. That's what I would take. It is totally different than where I was 6-7 years ago, for sure.
Nice, man. I think that's a great spot to wrap up.
Yeah.
What, if anything, are you planning to do in the new year or in the next few years? Anything's coming up?
Yeah, with the flex over in PT Inquest, Jason and I've had a blast, and it's really amazing to work with he and Eric and kind of step into that. And for me, and I've spoken to Jason about, like, I'm really interested in doing a bit more education, as much as I can, but specifically more of a mentorship style of education. I think, at this point, everybody kind of has abilities, and it's important as you mature and grow professionally, personally, to recognize where your strengths and weaknesses are. I am much better at, and have become much better at, kind of philosophic comprehension and discussions of wellness, health and wellness, physical therapy, strength and conditioning. I'd like to do more critical thinking style education. Maybe a little less of entry level, a little less academic level, but more of these conversational exposures, because I think there's a big hunger for individuals like us to do more of this stuff and just like kind of riff a little bit and talk and not feel judged about what you're doing, because nobody knows what they're doing. I mean, it's all kind of a degree, right? It's all a degree of confidence, and so I find that really entertaining for me. So I'd like to do a bit more of that. And like more on the lecture circuit. I'd like to do more interviewing, to be honest. We've got such a positive feedback, as I'm sure you guys have as well, like our casual chats. That style of education or learning is just really powerful. I'd like to do more, we'll call it informal, vulnerable, candid education, putting people, like almost like imagine CSM or ASPT or wherever domain you want to apply this, but sitting down and just me talking to you guys about what you do. There's no references. You don't get a chance to go like pirate through a bunch of studies before you answer the question. It's like, what do you do today? Like, I'm asking you directly now, what do you do and why? And it's not to say that's right or wrong. It just, I feel like there's a bit of bigotry that's become rampant on things like Twitter and Instagram, of people doing these things, citing all this stuff. And it's like, dude, A, you don't do that. I know you don't do that. B, that's not real. It's not authentic. I want some vulnerability, and I find it really fascinating and encouraging, because I think that's how we're going to grow as a profession, with a better seat at the table. So that's my goal, I guess, maybe for the next year or two, is to really see that evolve.
Awesome. Thanks again, Chris.
Oh, it's a pleasure, man. Thank you guys for having me. Sorry for rambling, and if I did, I apologize to your listeners if I put them to sleep. So,
Not a chance. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man. Much pleasure.